All right, let's jump right in. Today, we are tackling a massive question. How in the world do we secure the next generation of AI? And look, we're not talking about your everyday chatbot here. We're talking about Agentic AI. These are systems that can literally think, plan, and act all on their own. To secure them, we can't just invent new rules from scratch. We've got to be smart and adapt the security principles that we already know and trust for this wild new frontier.
So, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll nail down what makes Agentic AI such a unique challenge. Then, we'll get into the good stuff, aligning governance frameworks, getting proactive with red teaming, and building threat models specifically for these agents. We'll wrap up by looking at a whole new kind of audit, the explainability audit, and see how all these pieces fit together to give us real, strategic assurance.
Okay, first things first. Before we can secure these things, we have to understand what they are. We need a super clear picture of what makes an AI agent so fundamentally different from the AI we've been dealing with for the last few years.
So, what is an AI agent? Well, as IBM Technology puts it, it's not just a system waiting for you to type something. Think of it as a persistent worker. It remembers your conversations, it breaks down big goals into smaller steps, and it just goes to work, adjusting its plan as it gets new information. This is a complete paradigm shift. The AI now has long-term goals and can interact with the world in incredibly complex ways, and you can bet that opens up a whole new can of worms for security.
And this right here is where the rubber meets the road. We're making a leap from a simple, reactive chatbot to a proactive, stateful agent. But look at that last line, tool using. That's the real game changer. These agents can call APIs and interact with other systems. They can take real action in the world, which means our potential attack surface just exploded.
Which brings us to the core problem, the big, nagging question. All of our traditional security playbooks, they were designed for static, predictable applications. They are just not built for this new world of dynamic, autonomous agents. So, how do we do it?
So how do we even begin to build a solution? Do we throw out decades of security knowledge and start over? Absolutely not. The key here isn't to reinvent the wheel. It's to be clever and map our existing, battle-hardened security frameworks to these new AI challenges. And this slide, this is the whole strategy in a nutshell. It's all about translation. We take a very new, very AI-specific risk, like, say, an agent that has access to way too many tools, and we translate it into a security principle we've known for years, least privilege. From there, we can map it directly to a major standard like NIST SP 853. Suddenly, this scary new risk becomes something we can manage, control, and even audit.
Let's just double-click on that first one. A standard like NIST AC6 talks about giving users only the rights they absolutely need. Well, for an AI agent, that translates directly to having strict control over which APIs it can call. So when you see technical concepts in something like Amazon Bedrock Agent Core, like inbound and outbound authentication, that's not some newfangled AI idea. That is the modern, technical implementation of a classic security control.
Okay, so we've mapped our governance. But that's just theory, right? How do we actually pressure test these systems? This is where we have to put on our black hats. We need to adopt an adversarial mindset, not just to check the code, but to challenge the AI's actual reasoning process and find those weird vulnerabilities before a real attacker does.
And this quote from the UK Ministry of Defense, it is pure gold. It was written about humans, but it applies to AI 1,000 times over. We absolutely cannot fall into the cognitive trap of mirroring. That's assuming the AI thinks like we do. It doesn't. An AI might find a bizarre loophole in its instructions that any human would ignore. Its logic is alien, and if we forget that, we're in for a world of hurt.
And let's be clear, this isn't about running a one-off pen test. This has to be a cultural shift. We're talking about embedding a red team mindset into the entire lifecycle. It means you are constantly challenging the AI's goals, its plans, and its potential blind spots from the perspective of someone trying to break it.
All right, we've got the adversarial mindset. Now, how do we apply it systematically? You can't just poke at it randomly. That's where threat modeling comes in. And the best way to do it for an agent is to pop the hood and break the machine down into its core parts to see exactly where it might be vulnerable.
Think of it like a 4-point inspection. First, you scrutinize the input. How does it get its orders? Is that secure? Then, you look at its memory. Where is it storing context? And could that be poisoned? Third, you analyze its planning capability, its chain of thought. Can that logic be manipulated? And finally, you have to lock down its tools. What can it actually do in the real world? By looking at each of these stages, you can systematically hunt for weaknesses.
But here's the kicker. You can't just analyze the agent in isolation. The entire operational ecosystem around it, the MLOps pipelines that build it, the AIOps systems that run it, it's all part of the attack surface. You have to treat this whole thing like a living, breathing attack graph, where every component is a node. A weakness in one tiny, forgotten data pipeline could be the entry point an attacker uses to compromise the entire system.
So, what happens when something inevitably goes wrong? How do we do the post-mortem? After an incident, our ability to provide assurance, to figure out what happened, it all comes down to one critical capability: explainability.
Bottom line, we have to be able to reconstruct the agent's decision-making process. This means its entire chain of thought. Every reasoning step, every goal it considered, every tool it used has to be meticulously logged. Things like detailed session and trace IDs, which you see in platforms like Amazon Bedrock Agent Core, are no longer a nice-to-have. They are the primary evidence. They are the black box flight recorder for the AI's mind.
And this table just makes the shift crystal clear. Traditional audits are about looking at static things: code, config files, access logs. The goal is to check a compliance box. But an explainability audit, that's about digging through dynamic evidence, the actual trace of the AI's reasoning, to reconstruct what it was thinking. We are moving from auditing what a system is to auditing what an agent did.
All right, let's bring it all home. We've talked about governance, red teaming, threat modeling, and auditing. But these can't be separate activities you do once in a while. They have to be woven together into a single, continuous lifecycle if we want to achieve any kind of real strategic assurance.
It all boils down to these three actions, repeated in a loop. First, you align your AI risks with frameworks you already trust. Next, you constantly probe your systems using adversarial techniques to find weaknesses before someone else does. And finally, you audit everything with an intense focus on explainability and accountability. Align, probe, audit. It's a reinforcing cycle that builds trust and resilience over time.
So our path forward is clear. A continuous life cycle of aligning, probing, and auditing is how we secure the agentic AI of today. But that leaves us with one last really big question to chew on. What happens when these agents get so advanced that they can start auditing themselves, or even red teaming each other? What does our job look like then? Our role in assurance is definitely going to evolve, maybe from the people in the trenches to the overseers of a new generation of autonomous security agents. Something to think about. Thanks for joining me.